tiga Mayura kunalaklig minunga. Hello, my name is Mayura. My given name is Lorna Nauk Jones. I come from the people of Unalakleet, Alaska, and I'm Inupiaq or Inuit from Alaska. I'm currently attend Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, where where I'm majoring in environmental science and environmental policy. I'm really grateful that I grew up in Unalakleet. I was mostly raised by my grandmother and my parents. Um, and I grew up doing a lot of subsistence activities and uh, like picking ukpiks or salmon berries, blueberries. I learned how to ice fish in the winter, like for trout, and fish for salmon in the summer. And I grew up doing a lot of as I mentioned, subsistence activities and getting to be, which a lot of people in communities nowadays don't have. Um, it's one of those things where we have to be able to um, subsist for the land in order to be able to afford to live there, just because the cost of food is so expensive. Um, and so my family was really privileged in the way that we were able to go out and go hunting and fishing and um, gather indigenous foods. And so I grew up mostly on the tundra and on the river, the ocean, being able to fish and hunt and um, berry pick, which I think is what really is the reason what I'm doing right now, like environmental science, environmental policy, is because I want to protect um, the ways of life that I grew up doing, like seal hunting and caribou hunting. I want to be able to teach my my children and my grandchildren how to seal hunt and how to um, go out for to go pick ukpiks and to fish for salmon, because that's how my grandmother and my parents raised me. I used to spend like when I was a kid, my mom, even when I was a baby, would pack me on her back, just so she could go pick berries, or we'd go down the coast, to pick herring eggs off the rocks. And, um, I used to I would play on the, tundra while they went and picked, um, in like a little tent. And so I want to be able to raise my kids if I ever have them in Unalakleet too. And it it's a really small community, but a tight knit one. And um, I would just say that I'm really privileged to be able to grow up in such a beautiful and wonderful place. It was a really hard decision to make because I really wanted to stay home, and that's really important. Is that I wanted to be able to continue doing um, to be able to fish and hunt and still learn from my grandmother and still learn from my parents, because I think adolescence and um, like teenage years are very important in being able to figure out who we are as people and like what we want to do. Um, but I wasn't being as challenged in terms of my education when I was home, just because there's only like 700 people in my village and about 40 in my high school entirely. And my school was doing the best it could with the funding it got, but just in terms, because when you have like smaller schools, there's not as much opportunities given as going to a larger school. And I really wanted to challenge myself in terms of my education, and my grandmother wanted that for me too. And I really did it a lot of my decision really um, came down to her. My grandmother, Teresa Nanouk, um, she was in eighth grade when she dropped out of school to help her family, um, because and to provide for her family. And I just wanted to make her proud by getting a good education and being able to go to a college out of Alaska and be able to um, study environmental science and environmental policy and do the climate change work that really was important to my entire family because we see the effects of climate change all around us every day when you're in the Arctic. And so it was a really hard experience for me to leave just because I knew I didn't have that much time with my grandmother either. But I really wanted to be able to help my community by first being able to challenge myself in terms of my education, be more prepared to go to college, um, and be able to take harder classes that would prepare me for harder classes when I was able to get to the university level learning. And so, and it wasn't an easy decision, I'd say, being able to decide to leave my family at that early of an age. Um, but I know I definitely wouldn't be where I am today and have the I have today if I hadn't left. And I think it's one of those hard decisions where it's a lot of pros and cons go with determining whether I wanted to go to Mount Edgecombe in Sitka. And I definitely did lose out on those like years with my family, but I was able to gain a lot of opportunities like Arctic Youth Ambassadors and being able to lobby in the Alaska state government in June of last year and getting to go to Norway. I had all these opportunities because they, when I was a senior in high school, I was able to take up an internship. I think Arctic Youth Ambassadors is one of the best programs I've been in terms of the support that I've gotten throughout advocating, and it gives youth throughout the Arctic an opportunity to be able to have their voices heard at an international level, um and it empowers Arctic youth as leaders, whether you are Indigenous and have firsthand experience within the Arctic, or you just have experience with the Arctic and you may not have grown up in the Arctic, but you are very well versed in or have a lot of knowledge about issues regarding the Arctic, like climate change or housing, mental health, and various different things. But the support level I get is really important to me because as a youth, it could be very isolating when you're at at conferences and when you have a bunch of these people telling us that youth are the people supposed to that youth are the future and that we're supposed to have all these solutions, that we are supposed to be able to solve climate change when like it isn't just youth who have the solutions. It's we are ad advocating for our future, but it takes everybody in order to be able to um it takes everybody in order to be able to solve the problems around climate change and housing and mental health within our communities. it takes everybody to do that. And so the constant like stream of, oh, youth are the only ones that have these solutions. Youth are the ones that are going to fix our future and fix what is currently going on in the world is a bit it's kind of um it's a little daunting in the way that it's all we always hear it at every single one of the conferences, and especially if you're alone and you don't have very many people with you, especially young people, it gets very tiring really fast. And just in terms of like talking about climate change and talking about all these hard subjects that are currently going on in the world is it feels hopeless at some points, um, to know that our like Arctic communities are currently going through um, climate change at a faster rate or experiencing the effects of climate change at a higher rate than the rest of the world. And sometimes it feels like we're not being seen or not being heard. And so to have other youth with me or other youth that are a part of the program there at these conferences, it really changes how I feel at the end, and it helps me be able to go through the conference without feeling as hopeless because we're united and we are all working towards the same goal, and that is to provide a future that for future generations, for the next 8 generations, and to provide a future that our ancestors would be proud of. One where I could hunt seal and my friends could be able to share their culture too, or be able to um, help the next generations. And so it makes me feel a lot more helpful and be able to have like we stand up for each other too, especially when we're in spaces where we're often targeted just because we're the only youth there. And so to not just feel like I have to be the only one to say something, but that there's other people with me to be able to have my back and to be able to stand up too, and not just be the only youth there saying, having their voice heard. And it's really important to have that representation and to have um, a dominant a dominant youth presence at conferences, um, and to show that we're here and that we're trying to make a difference for communities and that there are already solutions there. We just need people to listen. It's not, we don't have to come up with new solutions. Um, we don't have to enact them. Like the people still in power are able to enact them. They just need to know of the solutions. They need to know where they come from. Like indigenous communities have so much traditional knowledge and it should be heard. And that's, I think, a lot of what having um, programs like Arctic Youth Ambassadors is for, is that we are youth all across Alaska who have very different upbringings and very different um, ways of knowing. And the knowledge that we have is very different from each other. But we all have that, we all are able to have a voice when coming to these conferences and have different ideas and different ways of knowing and be able to present those to people so that they know different sides of all our stories, to be able to advocate for everything that we really care about and everything that we're seeing within our communities that um, we know is affecting us and affecting the people within our communities that a don't have a voice at these conferences. And it's important to be able to have their voices heard, and especially when it's hard to live, especially when you don't get a lot of opportunities within villages and you don't get and it's really hard to travel too, especially because it costs so much money and we don't always get those opportunities to be able to afford going to these conferences to advocate for what we believe in and what we're seeing every day in terms of climate change and the devastation of um, generational trauma on our youth or our indigenous communities, and um, just piles and piles of problems that we see every day. And we're not always, people within communities aren't always able to advocate. And so I think Arctic Youth Ambassadors really gives a great opportunity for youth from villages like myself, um, who do see those things every time I go back home. Like um, I see what the lack of mental health resources does to the youth, and I see the effects of climate change that are having on being able to hunt and the safety of our people when we go out hunting, especially when it comes to hunting for seals. Like, we aren't able to step, we used to be able to hunt on the ice, just walk like 50 or so yards, or be able to hunt without having to use a boat. And now we aren't able to do that, and it's not always safe, and there's so many lives that get lost when it comes to unsafe ice that we used to be able to just walk on freely. And those are the kinds of things that a lot of those firsthand experiences are really important, and to know, um and I think what really changes a lot of people's perspective isn't always the facts, but it's firsthand knowledge of, um and those experiences that we have, the stories that we have to tell are really important. And I just think that this Arctic Youth Ambassador gives such a great opportunity to be able to tell those stories and provide opportunities for youth to help change our future. Um, and we get to form, by having these interactions with people, with leaders and ambassadors at conferences, we're able to form those connections and be able to network so that we could have opportunities to be the next leaders and have opportunities to be elected in leadership roles too. And it's really important that I know I'm going to be friends with the people, who other Arctic Youth Ambassadors in my cohort, for a really long time, because they're such great people and I connect with them on such a deep level, and we're all there for each other. And I think it's one of support systems that I've had in terms of advocating for my community and the opportunities that I've had before. And it is definitely one of the best ones, um, in my opinion. And I would just say it's an amazing experience to be an Arctic Youth Ambassador, to be able to have that opportunity. I definitely, growing up, I saw so much devastation to my community in terms of climate change. My my brother, when he in 2001, he caught his first caribou just a mile outside of my hometown of Unalakleet. And just within the last few years, he's either had to fly over 169 miles to Buckland, Alaska, or 167 miles to Buckland, um, or travel by snow machine all the way up north before he even sees his first caribou to catch it. And caribou is one of the most important foods that we rely on. Um, but now we can't rely on it anymore, and we have to, um, luckily we are still able to hunt for moose and muskox, but um and those traditional foods that we aren't being able to access anymore, um it's really heavy to deal with. Experiencing climate change while still trying to preserve our culture is a really hard thing to do, because due to colonialism and settler colonialism, a lot of our culture was taken away from us. And one of the most predominant parts of it is that we are able to still hunt for our foods because we have to. And so, um, seeing that my entire world change almost every year because we get less sea ice and because there are less caribou, climate change has had huge impacts on indigenous communities throughout the Arctic. And um, in my community in particular, my grandmother to drive a truck on the sea ice no more than 60 or 70 years ago, all the way to another village. And the last time I stepped on a sea ice when I was about 16, I had caught my first seal and I couldn't step more than 10 feet around me. And to know that those two experiences exist at this, my grandmother and me, like knowing that she was able to get to do that, to be able to walk on the sea ice more than, and to drive a truck on the sea ice, whereas I can't step on it more than 10 feet now, is is crazy to me. And this last winter there was no sea ice. All of it blew out, and there was only um, ice along the bay, but you could see the ocean in December. And it's really hard to be able to see that the way I grew up is changing so rapidly. The way I don't know if my children will be able to hunt seals on the sea ice or be able to um, go crabbing. Like I was 9 the last time I was on a snow machine, setting crab pots. Um, and that is really sad. And I'm really hopeful for the future because there are indigenous people knowing that we shouldn't, that our relationship with the land is reciprocal. Inupiaq values were considered caretakers of the environment and caretakers of the land. And we know not to take too much. We know that we aren't supposed to overhunt, or we're supposed to be able to take care of the land because the land provides for us. It isn't an extractive relationship. We aren't just taking, we're also giving back. We are a part of this, we are a part of the ecosystem and we are a part of the land. And knowing that, that is how changing that perspective is how we change our future. We are nature. As people, we are from nature and we are a part of the land. And when you take from the land, you're taking from us too. When we are like when we are fracking for oil, when we are mining, we are taking from the land and we're taking from ourselves too. We're taking our ability to be able to hunt. We're taking our ability to be able to live off the land the same way we're taking from the land. We're taking the oil and we're taking the gas because that is devastating our ecosystems. It is creating, it is thawing the ice. It is depleting our resources by continuous extraction. And so we're also taking away from ourselves. And to be able to realize that and to show, to be able to change people's perspectives that we are a part of nature and to change the language um, around how we see the land. Like, I think English is one of the um, worst, worst ways to, when describing the environment around us. It's one of the worst ways, in my opinion, to see the land because we often talk as the environment being an it, as trees being it and not actual beings, as plants and ecosystems and animals not being as it. and not giving them life. We're not giving them that respect in a way, um, because they are beings and they are a part of us, and they're living and they're breathing, um, and when we think of the land as something that is alive rather than something that is not moving, something that's not living, then it's so much easier to extract oil and gas. It's so much easier to be able to um, take from it without repercussion. And so I think in terms of like there is indigenous knowledge and how we know that, or at least my community and I know that um, when we take so much as we do with oil and gas, we're taking our future. Indigenous people have been left out of the conversation for far too long about climate change. And so there are so many different tribes that have so many um, have thousands of years of knowledge about how to be caretakers for the land that that their ancestors have lived on for thousands of years. And you've like when to how to preserve forests from wildfires, or and those kinds of things. Like that knowledge is within communities, and we have the solutions that are needed in order to prevent climate change from progressing. And so I definitely think it's really important to be able to have indigenous people's voices heard at conferences and in front of leaders, like to be able to have our voices heard and be able to talk with policymakers and decision makers, because if our stories are impactful and they're able to change people's ways of knowing and what people have thought was the only solution, um, and to be able to have our seat at the table and to have our to take up space within places like the UN, or within the government, because we deserve to have a voice when it comes to making decisions about our own homelands. I I think it's amazing to be able um meet other indigenous people, even peop indigenous people that I didn't know. Like I didn't know that there were Sami people, the indigenous people of um within Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and even Russia, until the last few years, which I think is just amazing that they're um like to be able to meet indigenous people from all across the Arctic is such an amazing experience, because we're all so very different people, and yet we all connect on such a deep level, um, from our views of how um, from views of how we're all experiencing climate change and the effects that it all has on our cultures. And I just think it's amazing to be able to see all to be able to see indigenous people um be able to talk at conferences and be able to advocate for their communities. It's very powerful, and it's one of the things that keeps me going, because it's um as I mentioned before, it's really easy to feel hopeless when it comes to talking about climate change and the constant cycle of talking to people, policymakers, and decision makers who are very stuck in their ways. But to be able to hear these powerful leaders and powerful um, indigenous people talk, and to hear what they have to say, is something that is so healing, um, as an indigenous person from Alaska. It's just amazing to have to be able to connect with people across the Arctic, people I didn't even know existed until the last few years. And so I just think it's, to me, I will always be in awe of Indigenous people across the entire world to be able to connect and stand for each other. I think is just amazing and so important.